Aimee is the founder and director of Close to Home, so she's kind of a rock star in a way.
The statistics indicate that around 1 in 3 women will experience domestic or sexual violence at some point in their life. You know, that's huge, huge, huge prevalence. And so it's kind of more of a normal thing. Like, that means that most of us know somebody that will experience it, and that 1 in 6 men will experience some kind of violence in an intimate relationship. And so it's actually really common, and that it's not okay that we can't talk about it because of the shame, because of the stigma. And so what Close to Home is really trying to do is change that and make it more okay to talk about it, and actually show that it's possible to talk about it in ways that are interesting and engaging and really relevant, and not just scary. Because I think that for many years, the domestic violence field, the way that it raised awareness for this issue was to shock people. And the reality is, I mean, I'm sure that if I did some exercises where we did a show of hands around people that knew people, that many of us know people that have experienced this. I went to Oberlin College, which is a really small liberal arts college in the middle of a cornfield in Ohio. And I was not that engaged, honestly, in what was going on campus. It seemed really theoretical to me. It was a really big activist campus, but it seemed really theoretical. So I was much more interested in kind of being more connected to families and things going on. Here in Jerusalem, and I actually worked at a hospital for Palestinian children from Gaza and the West Bank that had cerebral palsy, and I taught painting to them, finger painting. I mean, I'm not a painter, but through the arts and crafts that we did, a lot of them started to tell stories about the political violence that they were witnessing, and also the violence that was happening in their homes. So I became really interested in this whole notion of trauma and how trauma affects us. And I actually thought that I was going to become a clinical psychologist. That was my goal. And then I had this incredible opportunity to come to Boston the summer of '94 to do work around youth violence in Dorchester. And so there was this amazing organization called the 10 Point Coalition. It was a coalition of churches that was starting to do work around violence prevention, because levels of gang violence and street violence were high at that time. And so I came to Dorchester, and that's when I really learned about what community organizing was and what it meant for a community to come together and do problem solving and really look at what are the strengths in the community and how can we build off those strengths to create change. So I'd like to tell you a little. I have many stories that led me to start this organization, which is Think Differently About It. But the one that I'd like to tell you is about a little girl that I worked with. It's actually a hard story to hear. Sometimes it's hard for me to tell it. See how I do today. But I worked with a 7-year-old girl who actually saw her father stab her mother in the chest with a knife, and then held her mom as she bled to death from the stab wound. She held a towel over her mom as she lied on the floor in the middle of the living room, and her mom died. Her other siblings saw this incident as well, and it was my work with her after it happened to provide therapy, counseling to her. And as you can imagine, she didn't want to talk about what she had seen or the after effects in her family. And so one of the methods that I used to engage her was called projective storytelling, where I asked her to tell a story about something else, not about her own life. And so she wrote a story about a family of snakes. And this is how the story went when she finished, and then she read it to me. She said, so there's a family of snakes, and there's a little girl snake, and a mom snake, and a dad snake. And the mom snake is missing. Nobody knows where she is. And the dad snake was taken away by researchers because they wanted to study his heart. They wanted to study the nature of his heart. So they opened him up, they had surgery, they opened him up, and they took his heart out. And when they took it out, they could see that part of his heart was bad. So they removed the bad part of his heart, put it back in his chest, sewed him up again. And then the next day, the little girl and her dad had a party at the beach at sunrise. And I think that for me, that story illustrates the complexity of what it feels like to have this type of violence in our families, that we still can love the people that hurt us. I think it's another reason it's so hard to talk about it, why there's so much shame, can be so much shame about it. And that the trauma, the loss of her father to prison, was in many ways as traumatic as the loss of her mother.